And you are with Carl Chinn on this anniversary of the 36th anniversary of the Birmingham Pub Bombings. And I'm going to be joined in the studio by two men who were there on that horrific night of tragedy for the whole city. And they will be telling us about what they remember. Alan Hill, a fireman, and Neil McGuinness, a photographer.
On 95.6 FM, digital radio and online, BBC WM.
36 years ago, Birmingham and its people suffered the worst peacetime terrorist atrocity on the city when two city centre pubs were blown up by the IRA. They were the Tavern in the Town and the Mulberry Bush. They were targeted on a busy Friday night. The bombs killed 21 people, injured 182 others and scarred many people's minds and their souls. It was a night which coincided with BBC Radio Birmingham's 5th birthday party.
Absolutely coincidentally, in timing terms, BBC Radio Birmingham was celebrating its 5th birthday, which had been the week before, and for whatever reason we decided to have a listeners' party, 5th birthday party, at the Mayfair Suite, which was part of the Bullring Centre then.
The tickets were sold, I think, for 5p. It was a shilling, because we still thought of things in shillings and pence, even though we were decimal.
And I was the main compere. And we invited hundreds of listeners, lots of BBC Radio Birmingham presenters were going to appear on stage, bit of a disco, there was an orchestra as well, and lots of special guests, Lord Mayors and the like, popping in. And, of course, we were at the height of the Troubles then, and there was a funeral on that day of an IRA bomber, and we were all under the impression that there might be some activity to mark this occasion.
I went down into the hall and ordered chicken and chips in a basket. It used to arrive in a basket. I'd sat looking at the stage, ready for Les to come out and start the evening.
I was standing behind the curtains of the Mayfair Suite. I happened to be wearing a white suit. They were all the rage then, you know. And I was just going to go through the curtains and say, "Hello, everybody. Welcome to the BBC Radio Birmingham 5th birthday listeners party!" And everyone's going to cheer, and off we went. And as I was standing there, I felt it as opposed to hearing it.
It was like someone had kicked the legs off a grand piano. It was a big, hollow, odd, musical noise. But it was a very odd thing, as if it had fallen on the stage.
There was a kind of a vibration through the floor of the stage. The lights were on, just little roof lights in the ceiling, and as this vibration happened, and I think I probably heard something, but it was more the feel of it, all the dust that was in the rafters and the lighting gantries and things came down. You can see dust falling through these shafts of light and landed all over my white suit.
And if you take your hand and just pass it past your face so you get a breeze, that's what I felt, and we felt inside the Mayfair Suite this slight breeze go past you.
And of course I thought, what the heck? And even as I was thinking, I thought, it's a bomb.
And there was silence, people worked out, then there was a lot of talk and chatter. I remember thinking, I'm not going to get to eat my chicken and chips.
As I was standing there thinking, well, we seem to be okay. Cindy, the manageress of the Mayfair Suite, appeared at the side of the stage through the stage manager's entrance, and she said, "A bomb's gone off. We've got to cancel. We have to get everyone out as easily as we can."
And there was some confusion about whether or not we should all be evacuated out, or whether it would be safer to hold everyone for a while in the Mayfair Suite.
By now I could hear a million sirens outside. Bells, I think the ambulance still had bells then. Bells, sirens, it sounded like chaos. And it was, really. And so I had to go through the front curtains and have to make an announcement that I had not envisaged. Everyone knew or had a sense of what was going on. I said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have to evacuate the building. As you understand," I think I said, "there's been an explosion somewhere in the vicinity."
On the night of the Birmingham Pub Bombings, I was at home and I'd popped out to the local off licence to get a few goodies, and there were rumours then about something major going off in town, some sort of bomb blast, but that's all we knew. You have to remember back then we weren't living in a 24-hour news society. In fact, although I wasn't working at the station, I know that the BBC Radio Birmingham newsroom was closed down for the evening because the station closed down at a certain time, I think about 7 o'clock.
The bombs went off around 8:30 tonight in two pubs, the Tavern in the town and the Mulberry Bush.
I got the call at home, get in quickly to Pebble Mill. There's been an explosion in the centre of Birmingham. We don't know what it is, but get in as quickly as you can.
One police officer I spoke to said our message to Birmingham motorists tonight is to keep away from the Hagley Road at least for the next hour.
So details were sketchy, and it wasn't until the later news bulletins that it started becoming clear as to what a huge tragedy had occurred in the city centre.
Some memories there of a terrible night in Birmingham's history when two pubs, the Tavern in the Town and the Mulberry Bush, were blown up by the IRA, and 21 people killed, hundreds were injured, and that was John Platt, who's still with BBC WM, Les Ross, of course, and Richard Jeffs, who worked for the station at the time. I'm honoured to have joining me in the studio today two men who were there on that evening, who have very powerful and harrowing memories of that night. Alan Hill, the first fire officer on the scene. Alan, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And renowned photographer Niels McGuinness. Neil, thank you for joining us today as well.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to meet up with you.
We also, if you are able to, and this is a very difficult topic, we know this, if you are able to ring in and you want to have a chat with us, you know it will be handled sensitively. It's a very difficult topic, but we cannot let this anniversary go without honouring and remembering those that died. Alan, can I take you back to that evening? What were you doing before the bombs went off?
Right, Carl, what I was doing that night, I was a fireman based at Highgate Fire Station on Moseley Road. We started the night shift at 6 o'clock on the evening, and I was a designated driver for that night for the fire engine. We turned out to incident involving a bomb along Stratford Road at about 18:30.
Yeah.
We were there for quite a while. On the way back, I was making my way back to the station at Highgate, and we had a call over the radio asking us to respond to stand by at Central Fire Station, Lancaster Circus, to cover the two fire engines that had left for an incident in the city. I drove down Highgate Road, through the Queensway tunnels, so we had no radio contact as we went through the tunnels. It was a beautiful fire engine. It's got a Rolls-Royce engine, straight 8 petrol. It was warm, very fast. Into Central Station, easily. We caught a couple of little messages or part of messages on the radio. One was saying ambulances required, recovery vehicle required, Smallbrook Ringway. So we assumed between the four of us on the fire engine that it was probably two buses in collision. We couldn't pick up any more information as we went through the tunnels. I drove straight into the Central Fire Station rear entrance, into the bay, ready to go. We were there for 10 seconds. Message came over the tannoy, respond to 5-pump incident, persons trapped, some believed killed at Mulberry Bush at the base of the Rotunda. I turned out with the fire engine from Central Station, and within seconds the city was entirely gridlocked all the way around the Queensway, Mattow Circus. There was absolutely no room to manoeuvre whatsoever. Although it was totally against brigade orders at that time, any reverse running against the traffic was frowned upon. I had no alternative but to drive down Corporation Street, because in those days the traffic went up Corporation Street the wrong way. So I came down Corporation Street all the way. The traffic was fleeing out of the city, but we made good progress against the traffic down to the bottom of Corporation Street. The intention was to turn left into New Street against the traffic and make our way to Rotunda that way. As I just about made the turn into New Street, the Tavern in the Town exploded in front of us. It had seconds, and the dust was pouring out of the frontages above the Tavern in the Town.
And we'll come back and talk more with Alan straight after the travel. We'll also be talking with Niels McGuinness, who was a photographer working for the Birmingham Post at the time, who was there and saw what unfolded. You're with Carl Chinn on BBC WM.
BBC WM Eyewitness Travel.
Looking very quiet on the motorways at the moment. No reported problems on the M5, the M6, the M42, all checking in just great. If you're heading around Redditch today, Coventry Highway westbound, that remains shut for bridge maintenance work between the Moons Moat Drive roundabout and Battens Drive roundabout. And there is a revised service on cross-country trains between New Street and Bristol Temple Meads because of ongoing engineering works. Now, journey times are going to be extended by about an hour. If you can update us, call us now on 08453 00 2288.
WM at 40.
BBC WM is celebrating its 40th birthday this year with a special Christmas show at Symphony Hall. Guests include Les Ross, Malcolm Boyden and Malcolm Stent making a return to the Barmaid's Arms. To book your seat, call 0121 780 3333 or visit thsh.co.uk for more information.
Celebrating 40 years of the West Midlands radio station.
BBC WM's 40th anniversary show with Ed Doolan and Friends, Wednesday the 15th of December on BBC WM.
Across the West Midlands on 95.6 FM. Carl Chinn on BBC WM.
Today we're commemorating the horrific, well, not commemorating the bombing, but the lives of those that were lost and of the injured in the Birmingham Pub Bombings. I'm joined in the studio by Alan Hill, who was the first fire officer on the scene, and Neil McGuinness, a photographer. And we'll be talking with Niels in a moment. We'll be taking your memories as well. Alan, you described to us how you had to come down with your fire engine down Corporation Street against the flow of the traffic as people were fleeing the area. And just as you reached the bottom of Corporation Street, the tavern in the town blew up.
Yes, Carl. When we pulled up, the officer in charge of the fire engine, Sub-Officer John Frayne, who was absolutely exceptional. He was only 28 years of age. He was the oldest member of the four-man crew on the fire engine. Absolutely exceptional fireman for his age and tremendous leadership skills. He decided that because of the nature of the incident, we would pull up and stop there rather than proceed to the mulberry bush. We were all slightly stunned at first, obviously. It was like pulling into a film set. He jumped off and said, right, he said, let control know what's going on. He said, make up, he said, send an assistance message. And he left me. Took the other two men with him. And they tried to make their way down. So I let fire control know that we'd got a major incident and we were unable to proceed to the mulberry bush. I knew the building because I'd been a charge and scaffolder for many years before joining the service, and then after that I was a black cab driver before joining the service 3 years before, so I'd got full knowledge of the...
and just for the younger listeners, the mulberry bush was at the bottom of the rotunda, whereas the tavern in the town was down in a basement.
That's right. You got the mulberry bush pub was at the... Actually, although the rotunda was a New Street address, the mulberry bush itself was today where the Birmingham Information Centre is, and it was actually had a small St Martin's Ringway address at that time. Yeah. And it wasn't such a lively pub. The other one, full of young people, packed with young people, was a tavern in the town, very popular, a basement pub next to King Edward's House main entrance. You went down the stairs, very, very popular with the youngsters in a tightly confined basement area. That was the problem. And of course, when we got there, the stairs had been so badly damaged, things were a major problem. I told control we got a major incident. I knew the building, so I knew the height. I quickly looked at the height. The building was still stable. Obviously, there would have been loads of asbestos about from the dust clouds because of the age of the building. There was a chap standing to the far end of the crowd shouting that to keep away. There was a second bomb on the premises. He shouted that at least half a dozen times towards me, which I found quite unnerving, really. I then assessed it quickly. I counted the number of casualties on the floor. I worked out roughly what the casualties in the basement would be. I had a double-decker bus written off in front of me with about 25 passengers on board who still yet to get off the bus, and the bus driver was just looking at me with his hands in the air. I estimated, I tried to work out 2 casualties per ambulance, 3 casualties per ambulance, 4 casualties per ambulance, and I gave up then. I thought, right, 160, I need 40 ambulances. It was a stupid thing to ask for because we didn't have 40 ambulances in the city, but that wasn't my problem. I told control to make pumps 5, that was we wanted another 4 fire engine crews, and we requested 40 ambulances to attend. Fire control obviously questioned the 40 ambulances, but I confirmed that's what was required, and then the radio went dead. That was the main problem. Meanwhile, the sub-officer, John Frayne, who was absolutely brilliant, came back at the basement. He looked at me and he told me to remain on the machine in case a second bomb went off, because in those days, if a fireman was killed, it was one line in the accident book. If you scratched the fire engine, it was a 9-page report.
Oh.
That's how it used to be in those days. So the fire engine was the main thing. When John came up to me, I had to get off the machine because a girl had been dragged across to me with severe lacerations down the face and the neck, and we had run out of first aid equipment very quickly. So I jumped off, took my self-help bandage out of my tunic and wrapped it round to stop the flow of blood from her neck, and she was passing out by then. She was on her knees. I was trying to think as quickly as I could. I was telling the crowd that be patient, ambulances are on the way, but I knew that I was lying to them because I knew there was no ambulances on the way, because all the ambulances in the city, and there's only a dozen, had already been committed to at the first instance at the Mulberry Bush.
So is this where the black cab men came in and were so heroic that night?
Yes, they were absolutely superb, Carl. What happened was, as I said, I'd been a cab driver and actually had my own cab when I joined the fire brigade, so I knew the system inside out. I'd been a member of the TOA, Taxi Owners Association in Birmingham, the cab, so I knew exactly how many cabs would be in the city. But I was thinking at the time, do I walk these 100-odd casualties from the other side of the road, get rid of those, do I march them up to the General Hospital?
Yeah.
Do I take the damaged bus, which was unusable? Shall I wait for buses to come to load?
Yeah.
But the roads were all empty, nothing was coming through. And then, as I was treating this girl on the floor, this chap come up behind me who I'd worked for as a taxi driver many years ago, George Kite, and he said, Alan, he said, I know you're busy, which was a bit of an understatement.
Yeah.
But can I take 2 people to hospital? They've asked me.
Oh, what a gesture.
Yeah. He said, do I need the details? Do you need it? And I says, George, no, thanks, mate. And he went, and for some reason, my head went like a computer. I thought, he's got a radio in his cab. He's round the corner in Stevenson Place.
Yeah.
I've got contacts.
Yeah.
And I quickly thought, right, it's 20 to 9 now. There'll be about 30 cabs on the run at the moment. This time of night, they'll be in the city probably, inside the ring road on the ranks. So I shouted after him, George, I want you to send me an emergency message.
Yeah, carry on.
Sent me an emergency message to TOA. I want every available cab at the tavern in the town now, urgent.
And that was the message you sent, so all the cabs started to come?
Cabs were, in those days, were obliged to answer an emergency call because that was part of the contract.
And I'm going to come back to you in a minute, if I may.
OK.
I'm going to come to Neil's in a few moments. Before that, though, if you want to just put your earphones on so you can hear Brian, who's in Coventry, who's joined us. Brian, thank you for coming on air today.
Yeah, afternoon.
Afternoon, Brian. Just explain what you've got to tell us, if you would, please, Brian.
Yes, first of all, I owe Birmingham an apology. I made a mistake that night, Carl. Effectively, I was the chairman of an organisation called the Volunteer Emergency Service, which has been disbanded in the last couple of years. I was on telephone duty that night from my home, and I was actually up in the loft of my house in Olsley Park and heard the explosions over in Birmingham.
Really?
Yeah. And in pretty short order after that, there was a telephone call and discussions had as to whether to send, and we'd probably got of the order of 100 of our members, all with vehicles, that quite frankly we could have sent. And the decision was made that, well, if something goes off in Coventry, so out of pure, I have to say, out of the sort of decision you make on the night, we unfortunately withheld aid from Birmingham, which is a dreadful way of putting it, but, something that I've sort of had to live with, if you like.
But the thing is, Brian, it's very... you're going through a traumatic period yourself. That Coventry was also regarded as a target. You knew that. You knew you had to make a decision. You don't have to blame yourself, Brian. You mustn't. I know you've lived with this for years, but you, as a Brummie to you, I'm telling you, mustn't blame yourself for this, Brian. This was a horrendous night. You know, we've got to explain to younger people, the tension had been building for a year, 18 months, hadn't it, Brian?
Oh, it had, yes.
And there'd
absolutely
been
terrible
small
times.
bombs had gone off. There'd been worries about major incidents. So, you know, you had to make a call on that night, a decision on the information that you had, and you feared that Coventry could be also a target. Therefore, let's keep... And by the time, I would have thought, Alan, by the time they could have got over from Coventry...
Been far too late, Carl. The traffic was just snot. They wouldn't have got there. You've only got so much time. These people have been so badly injured. It was so badly injured, you know.
So you wouldn't have made it anyway,
No,
Brian?
that is the thing. That is the, if you like, the plus side.
Yeah.
That you think, well, all we'd have probably done was added another 100 vehicles or whatever
To the gridlocking.
to the chaos, and that's the sort of only solace that I've got on that one.
I really, and I'm sure you agree with me, Alan, he mustn't blame himself.
No,
must he?
Brian, really. In fact, we couldn't even get the fire engines or the ambulances to us that were there, but basically it was the ringway. It forms a ring of steel around the city centre.
Yeah, understood.
Brian, can I thank you? Can I thank you for your apology, but you don't need to apologise to us, Brian.
Okay, many thanks.
We value what you would have done anyway.
Absolutely.
Thank
Okay,
you, Brian.
cheers.
God bless.
Bye now.
Bye. Let me come to Niels McGuinness, if I may. Niels, just take your earphones off so you can hear me nice and well. Can I first of all thank you for coming, and secondly, can I pay tribute to you as an outstanding and remarkable photographer who has captured some of the most important events in the history of our city. Thank you, Niels.
Okay.
Niels, can I take you back to that night? Who were you working for that night, and what happened?
That was 36 years ago, and the Birmingham Post and Mail had a strike, National Union of Journalists. What a day to hold a strike. It's a chapel meeting, by the way, so I wasn't involved. But I covered for the Press Association and also the Associated Press. But it was difficult for me to get the films back for processing into Fleet Street. As Alan pointed out, as regards to the taxi cabs, I couldn't get one. After I took many photographs, it took me 2 hours, actually, to take these photographs. I had the rolls of film, but how did I get them to London? I couldn't have them processed as I usually do at the Post and Mail due to the strike. But eventually I moved off to Digbeth and managed to locate one taxi cab driver, and I handed in the films and he drove all the way to Fleet Street. So I managed to get some of the photographs in the last editions of the national newspapers, Carl. But when I started a week before midday. James McDade, he blew himself up in Coventry by planting a bomb at the telephone exchange. I was there that night when it occurred, and I got many photographs of that, so I stayed with the story the entire week. But I knew something was going to happen, and it certainly did that awful, dreadful night. I can still remember it now. Broken glass, blue flashing lights, burglar alarms were going off all over the place, especially New Street. And I took photographs of what Alan pointed out, the bus. It was the number 29A. There were no passengers on the bus when I got there, and I just photographed all the windows which were smashed. And at the side of the bus was this lady with a blood-stained dress. She had no jacket and she was crying. I really felt sorry for her. I turned back and I saw this solitary ambulance, and there was a man with bandages inside the ambulance being cared for by a lady, but there's no ambulance driver. So I took a couple of photographs of that, and I went up and down New Street taking photographs of people being rescued and carried away from the what do you call the pub?
The Tavern in the Town.
The Tavern in the Town. It's changed its name now to Yard of Vale. and I've just told now it's closed down.
How difficult was it, Niels? That's your job. You are a photographer. But
Well,
with
I
that
just-
scene of horror, how hard was it to take photographs?
Well, I had 2 cameras with me. They're 235mm black and white. They were black and white in those days. And I just carried flashing and flashing. I was on my own. There was no other photographers at that time. I went into the rotunda, and the broken glass. I just walked in, and there were dead bodies lying all over the place. But I took these photographs, which you probably have the Carl in front of you, and the fireman was there removing the bodies while I was still inside the premises. And I did see one man, I think it was a man, he was thrown out through the window into the street, and I tried to take photographs of that, but the firemen were quickly on the scene to remove his body. It was a dreadful night, and I can still remember it now. But I took many photographs. Oh yes, when I got to the cab, I saw this cab driver at Digbeth. He took the films off me, and what I did, I had to go back. I phoned the office, by the way, the PA in London, and they said, well, you better stay with it all night. So, and my wife, Jill, answered the telephone constantly, because they weren't accepting telephone calls due to the strike. And everybody, all the newspapers, television, and also the British Army in Belfast wanted to get hold of these photographs. Oh, what a night, what a night.
How has it affected the rest of your life, Niels, that night?
I'm a bit nervous about the scene, yes, a bit nervous. But I've always been a nervous man anyway.
And the sights that you saw must have been so harrowing and upsetting.
Well, the limbs all over the place, and most of the people in the rotunda were face down. But what an awful situation to have to photograph. But there was no other photographers there, so I just had to continue doing my job. Eventually, when I came back, I thought it's best to photograph the people at the hospital, the General Hospital, which is now the Children's Hospital in Steelhouse Lane, to take photographs of the people being bandaged, the walking injured. Yeah, walking injured. I took a Carl Bacon from Keys Norton. He was bandaged like the Invisible Man, but he let me take his photograph, and he was pleased to go back home. And that was used in the Daily Telegraph, by the way, the next day. But eventually, in the early hours of the morning, about 2 or maybe 3, I went to the Coventry Evening Telegraph to have it opened for me to use the dark rooms for developing the pictures for the wire services who came in. The wireman came in about 7 o'clock. But then I returned back. As I keep saying, what a night it was, I just couldn't sleep because I didn't have the time. They wanted photographs of the Home Secretary from... I forget his name now. It was the MP, Labour MP. Roy Jenkins.
MP for Stetchford.
Yeah, from Stetchford. He's now deceased. But he had to tour the rotunda, so they wanted photographs of him going into the rotunda and then leaving the rotunda.
I'll just come back to Alan, if I may, Niels.
Yes.
Niels is describing the scene as he saw it. Very difficult. He's got a job to do.
He has, yeah.
You've got a job to do, and but to take photographs of harrowing scenes, it must have been. It's obviously upset there for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
It was. You know Niels, though.
I do know Neil. Yeah, it's it really it was so traumatic. You wouldn't believe. I mean, even as firemen, we were used to sort of. Because in those days, the only thing of a crumple zone in a car was the person's inside. In those days, we had some real horrific incidents to deal with.
But the scale of this.
It was the scale of this. And it was 4 firemen isolated from anywhere else for the first 20 minutes. We had no assistance. And the officer in charge, John Frayne, was fantastic. He came out, he looked at me, he realised he went to ask me, have you asked for any assistance? He knew it was pointless to ask. He walked across the crowd went dead quiet, and he addressed the crowd and he said, we, 4 of us, we're unable to manage without assistance at the moment. There'll be a delay. I'm looking for male volunteers to step forward. And unbelievably, Carl, there was 6 or 7 young men and older men stepped forward. I was amazed. Because
they've been in the bombing.
Yeah, and this chap was still shouting at the other end. This chap who was well dressed, well spoken. To keep clear, there was a second bomb on the premises, and then a couple of the girlfriends then pushed a couple of less willing boyfriends to the front. So we actually had in total 11 male volunteers
who helped you carry people.
And they went down into the basement with John Frayne. I mean, the courage. I mean, the look of fear on the faces before they went in.
But they did it.
They did it. I mean, that is pure courage. That's not.
And they should be remembered, shouldn't they?
Everyone, and we've got photographs of them. Neil's got photographs, and you know, not one has ever come forward with the name or details ever since.
Who these men were.
We would love really to find out who they were.
Birmingham citizens.
Yeah, and they would. I've never seen anything. It was incredible. Oh, incredible.
Did you go downstairs into the?
I went down there into the ventilator, and it was.
Can I ask you what the scene was like?
It was a scene. Well, the words "total devastation" don't do it justice. No. Really, the stairs had gone. I knew the bar how it was normally, and it was just unrecognisable. The ceilings had given in, the floors above had given in, all the brick walls was down. There were just above the point of main impact. There were a good 2-foot hole in 12-inch deep reinforced concrete in the main entrance of King Edward House, where the bomb had been placed. There were limbs everywhere, body parts everywhere.
Because it was the reverberations when it happened.
Well, it wasn't just. If you can imagine when people say today, when the poor brave soldiers in Afghanistan step on a bomb, that you will never see injuries that bad in civilian life. Well, that night, not only these people that sort of metaphorically stepped on the bomb, but the repetition, the recuperation of the bomb had bounced around the rooms with nowhere to go and had pulverised them. It wasn't just the initially blast that pulverised. And, of course, by adopting the scoop and run method and getting everybody, and we were putting amputees into the ambulance.
So scoop and run, you literally pick people up and get them out as quick as possible.
Yeah, scoop and run, you don't mess with them. Because the heat of the blast had cauterised all the stumps where they'd amputated, and we were putting amputees in the floors of the taxis, just 6 or 7 people, and within the first 18 minutes we'd removed from the scene over 150 casualties from the tavern in the town.
So, what was happening at the Mulberry Bush at this time?
At the Mulberry Bush was a difficult situation. It wasn't such a busy pub. The estimates from the official reports say around 35 people were injured in the Mulberry Bush at the time. It wasn't so crowded. And all of a sudden, they were surprised that their numbers doubled instantly. But what they never knew at the time is when the bus driver put his hands up to me, I pushed them away.
Right.
I didn't want them down by me. I mean, I felt awful getting rid of 25 casualties, but
And that was from the buzz?
From the bus.
So it was 35 from the pub and 25
I pushed them up that way to directly...
But you had no option, did you?
No option whatsoever. And I was still conscious that there may have been a secondary device. So I told the bus driver to take them up. They went up. They disappeared down Worcester Street, and that's the last I saw of those.
Was there a secondary device, Alan?
Well, officially no. Unofficially, I know from both reports there was a suspicious device found afterwards in the Mulberry Bush and in the tavern in the town, and removed.
The night is obviously seared into your memory.
Oh, it just burns into your memory.
How has it affected your life?
Not in the slightest, Carl. Unfortunately, fortunately, it hasn't affected me at all. It was a good job. I had the tremendous amount of responsibility put on me for the rank I had, and which I enjoyed that responsibility, but I knew that we'd done the very best to get everybody, 200 people to hospital within the golden hour, and I think we only lost one of the casualties by the time they got to hospital.
And you see, we've got to emphasise again the situation here. Birmingham closed down at 11 o'clock on a Friday and a Saturday night.
That's right, but the pubs were kicked out at past 10, 11 o'clock.
So every pub, people would come that golden hour and everybody's leaving.
That's right.
That's adding to the mayhem, isn't it?
It was, yeah, and of course they got nowhere to go. They couldn't get out of the city. People couldn't come and collect them. There was no mobile phones in those days.
No.
Nobody knew what was going on, basically, you know. The first call that anybody knew, that the world knew about the incident at the tavern, was my radio message. That was the very first indication.
You're there with John Frayne. Who are the other 2 guys that were with him?
Nigel Brown, fireman Nigel Brown, he was about 22 years of age, and Martin Checkley, who was 24 years of age.
They were young lads compared to you, weren't they?
Oh, yeah. I was 20. I was just coming up to 28.
Yeah.
John was 28. They were younger lads than me.
What a job you all did.
Yeah. We'd all been in the Scouts. We'd all prepared. We all adapted, but we were all very well trained, very well disciplined, and very used to working as a team. So to us, it was another incident. Yeah.
And does your training then take over and the adrenaline?
Well, it
take
would
over?
do, but many incidents that you attend in the fire service, you have to turn everything you know upside down to fit the situation. So you need that inbuilt flexibility, really. But the training kicks in, you know the procedures, you know what's got to be done. I knew that I was by myself at street level, and my role was to get rid of the casualties.
I think everybody in Birmingham, although it's a huge city, we all knew somebody who knew somebody that was there, and we all knew somebody that may have been there. My brother was seeing a girl at the time. He was 17. He used to drink in the tavern at the time. That night, he should have been there, but he didn't go that night. He didn't meet. I used to drink in the mulberry bush. And for such a big city, what people didn't understand was that we all had a close call, didn't we, in many ways?
That's right, you know, big city, very small town centre.
Yes,
very
small town centre.
Always has been. I mean, I remember standing outside there, outside the tavern, on my father's shoulders, watching the steel erectors putting the new Martian Snellgrove up, first building after the war, you know, so I was very...
Let's hear, we've been talking with Alan Hill, with the first fire officers on the scene, the first four, Neil McGuinness, the only photographer at the time. Let's hear the second part of the way events unfolded that night. Earlier on, we heard how Birmingham responded, and that it was the same night as BBC Radio Birmingham's 5th birthday party.
It brings the total number of dead to what's believed to be 18. 9 were killed in this pub and 9 in the Mulberry Bush pub.
I was due to go to the party at the Mayfair Suite, but because I and my then husband had something else to do early in the evening, we were going sort of later, and my sister-in-law rang because she'd seen it on the television that this bomb had gone off.
The injuries are everything. There are fractures, there are burns, there are cuts, and there are a lot of people suffering from shock.
There was one sole education producer in the building at the time, because everybody else was down in the centre of town, holding the fort, playing endless sort of classical music. So I went straight into the station and spent the next, well, right through to the following evening on the station, trying to keep people at the microphone and getting news in where we could.
Well, the casualties have been taken to several hospitals in Birmingham. It's been a tremendous operation to remove the dead and injured from the wreckage of those 2 public houses.
Eventually I got there. We got all our reporters out. People who were on days off came in. We worked through the night on that story. Jack Johnson, the manager at the time, became a reporter, and several of his reports went in. We were feeding network as well because we were first on the scene. I mean, out of a tragedy came a news triumph, I suppose. Newsmen always think like this. It's sad, but you're thinking, God, this is a great story. Wow, we're on top of it.
It all went black, and there was a big noise. It was massive noise. I started screaming, and we heard people screaming, and then we just went for the back door, and that was all, really.
We went straight through the night, and then into the breakfast show. Some people stayed on the station. Some of our reporters did an 19-hour shift.
Could I have your name, first of all? Mr. Swain. And where are you from, sir? Sparkhill. What did you see? I was at the top of the stairs at the tavern in the town, and the first one blew, moved into the middle of the road and went down. So we'll get any help down there, and next minute I heard the one in our place go in the tavern. Do you work there, do you? I'm a security man. Have you any idea what the damage is inside? I'm not saying, sir. I'm not saying nothing. That's all I'm saying.
Colleagues who had been down there, who had seen some of the devastation and the emergency services, having to carry people away, they came back and were just shaking, and people bursting into tears and having to administer cups of coffee, sort of. I hadn't been there, and so those of us who hadn't actually seen it weren't quite aware of, what it was like to have to be an eyewitness of something of that sort.
The 2 bomb blasts in 2 public houses here in Birmingham city centre, timed at round about 8:30. A minute's warning phoned, we understand, from Maurice Buck, the West Midlands Assistant Chief Constable for Crime, who's handling operations. A minute warning phoned, just saying simply that there is a bomb in the rotunda. That warning received at the Birmingham Evening Mail. A minute later, the 2 bombs went off almost simultaneously at the 2 public houses, the Tavern in the Town pub in New Street and the Mulberry Bush at the bottom of the rotunda. This is Jim Rosenthal in the radio car. Back to the studio.
that night, I can remember absolutely vividly where I was when I got the call. I was having a shave in my house, the first house I ever bought in Poulton Close, Moseley, and I got the call from a fellow called Peter Perks, said, Jim, you better get to the middle of Birmingham. This is the big one, which we had been waiting for. And I remember getting down there, and I remember seeing the most appalling things, working through the night from that radio car in the middle of Birmingham and broadcasting away. And then I remember going back to Pebble Mill, and we had a really good station manager, a man called Jack Johnson, an abrasive Scot, and I sat down in his office after at about 4 in the morning, and I just burst into tears. And you didn't have things like trauma counselling and things like that in those days. He came over, poured me the biggest glass of scotch I've ever seen to drink that, and then he said, now get into your car. Yes, get into your car, go home, have a sleep, because I want you back at 10 in the morning.
I'm Nick Owen, and I started my broadcasting career with BBC Radio Birmingham, and it was interesting to hear there that Jim was told to go home and compose himself, really ready to come back the next day. I was told to go home as well, having been involved in a different aspect of the pub bombings or the IRA campaign elsewhere. And I was told to come back in at about 3 in the morning to take on the radio car from Jim and go and report live from the scene of the atrocities, by the mulberry bush particularly, and watching the sun come up and the emergency services working flat out to see who they could find alive, looking for evidence, of course, the police, people coming to work as daylight broke. It's not surprising that Jim burst into tears, and I would say probably I was on the verge as well, because it was a shattering experience. We were pretty young guys, you know, in mid to late 20s, and by a street it had to be the biggest story we'd ever covered, and I would say I probably haven't covered a more sinister and appalling story since.
Nick Owen and Jim Rosenthal with their memories of a horrific night in Birmingham's history. I've been honoured to have in the studio with me today Niels McGuinness, photographer, an acclaimed photographer, who's covered so many of the big events in Birmingham's history, but who was the only photographer on duty at the start of that terrible evening 36 years ago when Birmingham was devastated by 2 IRA bombs. Niels, can I thank you for joining me today and sharing your memories?
It's been a great pleasure to meet up with you.
And thank you for all the work that you've done over the years, Niels.
I still love taking photographs.
Alan, you were with the first fire crew that was there. Yeah. The 4 of you were young men. You did your job.
Yeah. Yeah, did to the best of our ability, Carl, yeah.
The one question I meant to ask you was, obviously, there was only a few ambulances. They must have all come, or as many as possible.
Eventually, they came. I think the first official ambulance came after 35 minutes. Yeah. We picked up a stray one that was lost, but...
Because they got other jobs on, hadn't they?
Well, of course. They're
running mobile phones.
12 in the city. And of course
12 in the city.
They're running people around in the normal day-to-day or evening work, you know.
And what about the police? They must have been...
Well, they were so overstretched up at the airport that actually they didn't turn up for a long time, you know.
And this is what we need to emphasise to younger people. It's not like, say, when we... Sadly, we've become used to terrorist threats and we've become used to terrorist alerts. Yeah. Then this was all a new situation, wasn't it, Alan?
Totally new, you know. But I mean, our thoughts have always been, the fights have always been with the victims and their families, you know. And everybody was treated with the utmost respect, whether they were dying, dead, or seriously dead. Everybody was treated with the utmost respect. And everybody got to hospital within the golden hour. And that's the only time in the history of the world that many people have ever got to 2 of the finest hospitals in the world within the hour.
The General and the Aki?
The General and the Aki. 2 superb hospitals. How their staff coped, I do not know. I just do. How they managed to repair some of those people, I do not know. They did fantastic work. Fantastic.
Can I thank you not only for joining us today, Alan, but also for sharing your memories, many of which are very upsetting and harrowing, but also for what you and your fellows did on that night, because it's something us Bromwies will always remember.
Well, thank you, Carl. It's a privilege to be here. Thank you.
God bless. You're with Carl Chinn on BBC WM.